Chapter 16. A Glimmer of Hope. May saw that Carrie had looked up sharply from their Monopoly game when I entered the house and paused by the living room door. She turned too, her eyes wide and filled with curiosity and worry, as her brother's. "You were gone a long time," Carrie said. "Where's Aunt Sarah?" I asked. "Upstairs with Dad," he replied. His eyes searched my face. "You all right?" I started to nod, then stopped and said no. Carrie glanced at May, then back at me. "Want to go for a walk?" he asked. "We can get some ice cream in town, or..." "I'd rather just walk on the beach, Carrie, and then go to bed tonight," I replied. He nodded and signed to May and asked her to run up and tell Aunt Sarah we're all going for a walk. She jumped to her feet and hurried upstairs. Carrie took my hand and we went outside to wait for May. The sky had become overcast and not a star in sight. There was a strong breeze coming from the northeast. I laughed to myself, thinking that people I knew back in West Virginia would be so impressed with my knowledge of the weather systems, they would start calling me the weather girl of Sewell. "Why are you smiling?" Carrie asked. "I'm just thinking about the people back home and how different I would seem to them now," I said. "I wish you thought of this as your home," Carrie said softly. "It's the only place you have any real family, the only place where someone who really cares about you lives." I didn't reply, even though I felt his eyes on me and my heart had warmed to his soft words. Instead, I looked out over the dark blue ocean that seemed to flow into the sky. Terns barely visible, looking more like ghost birds, called to each other. To me, there was a note of desperation, fear in their cries. It was as if they were afraid they would lose each other forever in the darkness. Off in the distance, I saw the lights of a tanker just emerging from the horizon. It looked so small and far away. The sea is a place for people who don't mind being alone, I thought, for people who actually crave being away from the din and clatter of society. Out there, the sky must be overwhelming at night and make one feel either tiny, insignificant, or part of something much bigger than anyone could experience on the shore. "I'd like to go for a real sea trip one day, Carrie." "You mean like overnight? Days?" "Yes." "Okay," he said. "When?" "Someday," I said with a smile. "Something very, very serious is happening, isn't it, Melanie?" he asked with a shaky voice. I nodded just as May came out to join us. I took her hand and the three of us began our familiar walk on the sand. Although it was harder for me to see because of the thickening darkness, the ocean was just as loud, if not louder than ever. "Looks like a storm." "But it's not," Carrie said. "The clouds were all gone, and they'll be before the morning." "Nevertheless, it's a bad night for astrologers," I said. "What?" "People who need the stars to tell your future," I explained. "Oh, you mean like your new friend Holly?" "Yes." "She read your future lately?" he asked in a timid voice. "Yes." "And?" "She predicted a big change involving family, and she was right." As we continued along the beach, I told him about my discussion with Grandma Olivia and what she suggested, or rather what she demanded, backing it up with threats. Carrie was astounded. "She wants you to live with them?" "I think she can make a lot of trouble for everyone if she doesn't get her way." "I'll go talk to her tomorrow," he said firmly. "She can't run everyone's lives." "No, Carrie, I don't want to be the cause for any more family turmoil." We plodded in silence for a while, then Carrie turned his back to me. "What's Kenneth gonna say about it?" "I don't know, I'll tell him in the morning." "Then you made up your mind?" Carrie asked, stopping. I felt May's grip tighten. We had told her nothing, but she surely sensed the tension in my fingers. "Maybe I can do more good this way. Good for Grandma Belinda, too. I think Grandma Olivia and I have reached an understanding. We're like two pit bulls who faced each other, claimed our own territory, and backed away. Besides, she's not all wrong about men," I said with some sort of bitterness. Judge Childs, my grandfather, wasn't exactly thinking about how his actions would affect the people he supposedly loved. I feel sorry for him now, but I don't approve of what he did. Every time I think of Kenneth's face when he described what happened with my mother, I get sick about it. Kenneth blames him for my mother's bad behavior, for everything. It's terrible for a son and a father to be so estranged. I don't want anything like that to happen between you and Uncle Jacob, Carrie. It won't. It doesn't have to happen if you stay here either, he said. It might. And then in the end, you would only hate me for it. I would never. Besides, I offered, you and I will probably have an easier time seeing each other this way. We would actually go on dates. He thought about it, and I saw that it pleased him. We walked until we came to a small hill spotted with scrub bushes. We all sat there a while, the wind making my and May's hair dance over our foreheads and faces. She laughed about it as we brushed the strands away from each other's eyes. May's not going to understand you're moving out, Carrie said. I'll explain it to her somehow so she doesn't feel terrible about it. She'll miss you almost as much as I will, he warned. You'll bring her to see me, and she'll spend lots of time there. It won't be the same for her. She's never been comfortable at Grandma Olivia's. She's always afraid of breaking something valuable or tracking in dirt. I'll see to it that she's more comfortable there, I assured him. You're not thinking that you'll take charge of Grandma Olivia, are you, Melanie? Carrie asked with a smile. You never know, I said, and he laughed. I swear you have more blind faith than Laura had, and that's saying a lot, too. May stood up and went to fetch something in the sand. While she was away, Carrie leaned over and kissed me. It's going to be hard not having you right across the hall, Melanie, he whispered. I won't be far away, I promised. May returned with what looked like a girl's light brown shoe. The discovery excited her, and she handed it to Carrie and signed questions quickly. He shook his head. Someone could have lost it running in the beach, he explained. Turning to me, he added, She thinks it comes from that boat that sank, but the ocean that doesn't give up its treasures so easily, he remarked. May wanted to keep it, however, Carrie didn't want her to have it, calling it garbage. In the back of her mind, he muttered, she thinks it's a gift from Laura. She's always expecting some sign to prove her sister hasn't forgotten her. It's not a bad thing to hope for, Carrie, I told him, but he shook his head. It's useless and painful. It's better that we don't give her any encouragement, he insisted. Reluctantly, May left the shoe and walked on, making a circle before returning to the house. Aunt Sarah was downstairs preparing tea and some biscuits for Uncle Jacob. I told Carrie I wanted to hold off telling her about my discussion with Grandma Olivia. Grandma Olivia will probably tell her herself, Carrie said, and sure enough, Aunt Sarah revealed that Grandma Olivia had called to say she was coming to visit tomorrow. 2 days in a row, isn't that nice, she added. Neither Carrie nor I said anything, suspecting the real reasons for the visit. May was tired, so we went upstairs and I helped her get ready for bed. I watched her sign and mouth her prayers and then kissed her on the cheek fixed her blanket. As I started away, she seized my hand and told me she had a secret. I watched her describe how she was going back tomorrow to get the shoe and put it with the other things she found on the beach. They were in a box in her closet, and she'd shown them to no one but me. I promised I wouldn't tell Carrie. All of us, especially little girls, needed someone to trust, someone with whom we could share our deepest secrets. She looked revealed and happy and wished me good night. I lie awake for a long time listening to the sounds in the house. The wind died down just as Carrie predicted it would. I could hear Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jacob's muffled voices. They sounded like ghosts in the walls. After a while they were silent, and there was nothing but creaks in the floors and ceilings. One of those creaks grew louder, and then I heard my door open and close. Carrie was silhouetted. "Just let me get close to you, please," he begged. My resistance collapsed like a sand castle on a high tide. Carrie and I became paralyzed, both of us hardly breathing. There was a gentle knock. The door opened and Aunt Sarah appeared. "Melanie, dear, are you still awake?" she called in a loud whisper. I didn't speak, but she stood there, silhouetted in the hall light. I just felt bad, not getting to speak to you after you returned from Olivia's. I remained silent, actually holding my breath. My heart drummed so loudly I thought she would feel the vibrations if she didn't hear the beat. But after another minute, she backed out and closed the door softly. Neither Carrie nor I moved for a long moment. "You'd better go back to your room, Carrie. I'm too frightened." "All right," he said. "Be careful she doesn't see you leave or your father hear you in the hallway." "I will." He leaned over and kissed me goodnight. "I love you, Melanie, I really do." "I know," I said. It sounded almost sad. I hadn't meant it to sound that way, but it made him hesitate. "You love me too, don't you, Melanie?" "Yes," I said, truly believing I did. It felt more like love than anything I'd ever felt with another boy, and no one had been as close to me as Carrie had. "I don't trust my grandmother," he said before leaving. "She probably knows how we feel about each other and she wants to do something to stop it." "She can't," I said. "Not even she is that powerful." Through the darkness I could see him smile. His face was happy at my response. "Good night," he said, and he slipped out of my room. I waited, holding my breath, hoping that Uncle Jacob and Aunt Sarah wouldn't catch him. Maybe moving into Grandma Olivia's wasn't such a bad idea after all, I thought. Something had to put the brakes on this roller coaster Carrie and I were riding. I had just proved to myself that I certainly couldn't. To calm my raging blood, I practiced the meditation techniques, and I found a doorway to sleep. Once again, it was Holly instead of Kenneth who came for me in the morning. Carrie was already off to work and May was at school. Aunt Sarah was on her way upstairs to bring Uncle Jacob a second cup of coffee and the paper. "I've got a lot to do today," she told me. "Olivia always looks at the house through a microscope and she'll be here for lunch. You have your hands full with Uncle Jacob, and besides, a few people take good care of their home as you do. She has no right to pass judgment anyway. She has a housekeeper and probably never lifted a broom in her life. Oh no, when she was younger, she had to do all the housework because her father wouldn't employ a maid. And Belinda..." She stopped and bit down on her lower lip, realizing she was about to violate her own rule. If you can't say something nice about someone, don't say anything. Holly beeped her horn, and I knew it was she who had come because her horn sounded like a goose with laryngitis. This time, I was more definite about my promise to be home early enough for dinner, and then I left the house. Holly was wearing her half-moon silver earrings that dangled neatly to her shoulders, and a shimmery tank top with dark blue full-length skirt with sandals. Her toenails were neon pink. "He slept in the studio, if he slept at all," she muttered as I got in the car. "I didn't realize he hadn't come to bed until I woke up this morning. Either he's hypnotized himself or the sculpture has possessed him." "Artists," she said, raising her eyes. When they get hooked on their own work, they're worse than the monks who take vows of silence. But, she added, turning to me, I must admit, I've never seen him so taken with anything else that he's done. She blinked and took another look at me. What's with you this morning? You look serious, as a truck driver with hemorrhoids. I've got to make some very important decisions, I said. Oh? Well, I told you that your day of birth indicates that imaginative mind, coupled with excellent powers of observation. Don't trust too much to luck. Depend more on your own intuitive vision. Luck, I said with a laugh. Whatever I bet on is sure to lose. Don't be so down on yourself. Remember what I said about negative energy, Holly warned? Your personal planets are Saturn and Uranus, she continued. Under favorable influences, it's good for seeking favors from elderly people, but use tact and diplomacy instead of force. And under unfavorable influences, I asked? She nodded. Postpone change and long journeys. Is it favorable or unfavorable of a time? I asked. I'll study the charts and let you know later, she promised. Holly was so serious about her beliefs, I couldn't laugh. Who knew? Maybe there was some truth in it. Kenneth was in his studio when we arrived, but wasn't prepared for what he looked like when I entered. He was pale and drained, his beard straggly, and his cheeks and neck unshaven. His clothes were wrinkled and looked slept in. His eyes were distant, bloodshot, the eyes of someone looking beyond everything that stood before him. He barely muttered a good morning when I greeted him. I saw he made considerable progress on the sculpture, especially with the face. It was becoming the face in the drawings. The face of my mother more than it was my face. There was that slight turn in the upper lip that Mommy had, especially when she was being coy. Kenneth's hands did have miraculous artistic power, I thought. As I gazed at the work in progress, I felt the movement. It was almost as if the stone girl would become flesh and blood at any moment and pull herself out of the base. Under his surgical fingers, the marble looked malleable, easy to form than clay. The figure's shoulders and face already showed like skin-like texture, down to the way it rippled over the embossed cheekbones and breastbone. How was I to compete with this for his attention and love, I wondered. Did you have breakfast yet, Kenneth? I asked. For a while I thought he'd either hadn't heard me or didn't care to reply. Then he paused and looked at me. I had some coffee and a piece of something, he said. Piece of something? A donut, I think. He thought another moment. Or was that yesterday? He shrugged and looked at his sculpture. Grandma Olivia sent for me last night, Kenneth, because your father told her what he told me. Oh? He brushed off the left eardrobe of the sculpture and stepped back to study the face of Neptune's daughter. Just a minute, he said. I want to check something. I thought he was going to look at me to compare, but instead he went to his drawings. He nodded to himself and wiped his hands on a rag. What were you saying about Olivia? She sent for me because Judge Childs told her about our conversation. What did she want? She wanted to be sure that I told no one. She's afraid of a new scandal, and she's so concerned that she practically ordered that I should come and live with her and Grandpa Samuel. She forbade me to live with you. Kenneth stared at me. Just when I thought he was going to say something, he turned back to the drawing. The way you just raised your right eyebrow, he said. I never saw you do that. It's interesting. It sort of indicates some mature insight. I like it. But Haley never did that. He muttered more to himself than to me. Did you hear what I said, Kenneth? Grandma Olivia wants me to live with her. She says it's better for Uncle Jacob's recovery, and if I was living there right now too, it would only fan the flames of a scandal if I came to live with you. She's right about that, Kenneth said. Olivia's always been a sensible one, the one with solutions in the family. You think my moving in with her and Grandpa Samuel is the right solution? I asked, and I held my breath. Might be, he said, and turned toward the sculpture. I stood there, fighting down the lump in my throat and swallowing back my tears. I had hoped he would tell me not to go live at Grandma Olivia's. I hoped he would insist that I move in with him, and that there was no other real solution, no other place I belonged but at his side. Why should he care about scandals? One thing's for sure, he said as he approached the marble. You'll get the best of everything living there. Except love, I muttered sharply. At first I thought he hadn't heard. He just stared at his work. Then he turned and looked at me with his eyes finally focusing on me. Don't put too much stock in that, Melanie. Love is fragile at best, and often burden or something that blinds us. It's fodder for poets and songwriters, and they build it into something beyond human capacity. Falling in love means enrolling yourself in a school of disappointment. Being human means failing each other often, and no two people fail each other more than two people who pledge to do things that they'll never do because they're incapable of it. He gestured towards his sculpture. That's why art is enduring. The look of love or hope, or the look of compassion, bravery, whatever you capture is forever. We spend our lives trying to get someone to be as enduring as a painting or a sculpture, and we can't because the feelings crumble as quickly as the flesh. That's not true, Kenneth, I insisted. He turned back to me and sighed, then shook his head and smiled. You know what I miss the most about my youth? My gullibility. It's nice believing in everything and everyone. It makes you feel secure. But be strong and depend more on yourself, and you'll be ready for disappointments. That's the best advice I can offer you. Go live with Olivia. She's a real guru, not Holly with her stars and moon. Olivia can read the future better than anyone. She's a true captain of her soul and a master of her fate. She's endured, and she's stronger than anyone. Disappointment withers in front of her. She can stare down disaster. My father cries in his beer, mourns his lost youth and his mistakes, while Olivia will rage on until the day she dies. And even death gets a little satisfied when it takes someone like her. For death, Olivia is just a reminder that it too is a slave to something bigger. It's just an errand for a boy of nature. So live with her and learn from her, Kenneth concluded. Then he took up his tools and returned to the marble creation, not seeing the tears brim in my eyes. I sucked my breath and left the studio. He didn't need me there, I thought. The vision is all in his head now anyway, just as he always claimed. Holly was sitting in front of the house on the stone bench, Ulysses at her feet, as she worked on a chart and thumbed through her books. When I approached, she looked up with surprise. Why aren't you working? There's nothing for me to do in there. You were right about him, I said. She raised her eyebrows. Oh? Ignored you too, huh? Something like that. Were you crying? She asked, and she gazed at me closer. No. I turned away quickly and took a deep breath. Oh, honey, don't let him get to you. Artists are so moody and... It's okay, I said, and I smiled at her. Could you take me home? I'd do more good helping Aunt Sarah today. Sure. Oh, she said, about your chart, the planets? Yes. It's a favorable time, a time for change, she said. She didn't have to tell me, I already knew. Grandma Olivia's Rolls Royce was leaving the house as Holly and I made the turn. The sight of that luxury limousine made my heart do flip-flops, and I was afraid now how Aunt Sarah would react if Grandma Olivia was proposing. I was sure Uncle Jacob was ecstatic. "I've made up my mind," Holly said as we pulled into the driveway. "I'll be leaving the day after tomorrow." "Oh no, I'll miss you," I said. She smiled and leaned forward to squeeze my hand and give me a kiss. "And I'll miss you too, sweetheart. You're a very nice girl, Melanie, full of good energy, compassion, and love. Someday you'll make a lucky man a wonderful companion." I hurried into the house, worrying more about Aunt Sarah than myself at the moment. May was in the kitchen, making hot oatmeal for Jacob. She was surprised to see me and didn't know yet what Grandma Olivia had wanted. She told me Aunt Sarah was upstairs with Uncle Jacob. I went upstairs. The door to Uncle Jacob and Samuel's room and Sarah's room was closed. I hesitated and knocked softly. They must have thought it was May and wondered why she was knocking. Aunt Sarah opened the door and looked out at me with bloodshot eyes. Uncle Jacob was dressed in a cotton flannel shirt and pants. Aunt Sarah was helping him dress. "Melanie, you're home already?" "Yes," I thought. I looked past her at Uncle Jacob, who struggled to pull on one of his socks. He did look stronger, and more color was in his face. I was sure the news Grandma Olivia had brought had cheered him up. "I thought you might need me here more." "She doesn't need you," Uncle Jacob snapped. "Everything's fine here." "He insists on getting up and going downstairs," she said mournfully. Did you ask the doctor, Uncle Jacob?" "I don't need a doctor to tell me what I can do and what I can't," he said and pulled on the other sock. Aunt Sarah hurried to help him with his shoes. He turned to me as she did so. "Good, you came home early, though. You can start packing," he said. "Your grandmother can send the car over for you earlier than I thought," he added. And Aunt Sarah uttered a cry, then pressed her hand against her mouth and glared as he glared down at her. "Now, Sarah, you heard all you know, and it's best for everyone all around. We're just lucky to have my mother and father alive and strong enough to handle the problem." "Is that how everyone sees me now?" I asked. "The problem?" "She's never been a problem for me," Aunt Sarah said. "And the children, everyone will be better off," Uncle Jacob insisted, "especially the children." "I'm not full of contamination, Uncle Jacob." "You're Hallie's daughter," he said, as if that explained everything. "We can't help what's been passed through the blood. It takes someone as strong as my mother to keep things right," he said. "Yes, she's got a wonderful track record," I snapped. "Now, you don't be insolent or disrespectful. You ought to be grateful someone wants to take you in her home. You're a result of lust, sin, and—" "Jacob!" Aunt Sarah exclaimed. She stood up and he turned his head away. "I've got to get some exercise," he muttered, "so I can build myself to get back to work." He started to stand, wobble, and then sat down hard on the bed. "Jacob!" "I'm fine, just a little bed weary," he said. When he started to stand again, Aunt Sarah put her arm around his waist, and reluctantly he leaned on her shoulder. "There," he said, standing. "That's a start." Aunt Sarah looked at me with her eyes so full of sadness I had to turn away. "I'll go pack," I said. "Good," Uncle Jacob muttered. My throat tightened and my tongue felt glued to the bottom of my mouth, so all my words were swallowed back. There was nothing more to say to him anyway, I thought. After his confession at the hospital, I was a constant embarrassment to him. He couldn't look at me and not feel guilty. I brought so much needed relief if I would leave. Grandma Olivia didn't know how right she was when she suggested my moving out would improve Uncle Jacob's chancing for recuperation. May was waiting for me in the hallway, her eyes full of questions and confusion. She wanted to know if we could go for a walk in town. I smiled at her and took her hand. I brought her into my room and sat her on my bed. I began by reminding her why I had come. She was sad about my mother, but she quickly told me she was happy that I was here. I thanked her and then told her about Grandma Olivia's offer and why it would be good for everyone. I didn't tell her about my grandfather or his sinful history. I tried to make it seem as if I would be gone for only a short while and would always be nearby. How could it be good for everyone? Didn't I help her mother? How could I explain it to her? I wondered, and then I did the one thing I tried to never do. I told a lie to make things easier. I told her Grandma Olivia needed me. The idea of Grandma Olivia needing anyone surprised but interested her. May was so forgiving and compassionate she couldn't deny anyone anything, even someone like Grandma Olivia, who seemed to have everything she could ever want. In the end, she accepted it. It brought tears to her eyes, but she didn't cry. She offered to help me pack, and I explained that I had very little to bring with me. Grandma Olivia was going to buy me many new things. When I heard Uncle Jacob and Aunt Sarah in the hallway, I told her she'd better see what she can do to help her mother, and she left. Uncle Jacob and Aunt Sarah made a lot of commotion going up and down the stairs. Uncle Jacob got dizzy once, and when I came out to help, he made a miraculous recovery and completed the journey. Aunt Sarah brought him outside to sit on the porch. As I sifted through the things I would take with me, I recalled when I had first came to stay in this room. I had no idea what sort of room Grandma Olivia would provide for me. Chances were it would be bigger, of course. I hadn't done very much to change this room, so much of what was in it still had significance and great importance for Aunt Sarah. Laura's love letters were as they had always been. Her clothes remained in the closet and bureau. Her dolls, her music boxes were undisturbed. Aunt Sarah was sure to return to this room, to its shrine. After I moved away, I thought, now she would mourn her daughter's death a second time. I had tried to be a daughter to her, but the truth was no one could replace Laura. And that hole in her heart that she hoped I would fill would always be there. Maybe it was more painful, even deceitful for me to wear Laura's clothes and sleep in her bed. Maybe, as Kenneth had said, Grandma Olivia was the real guru of this family. She knew best. I wish there was a way I could say goodbye to Laura's memory, a way that made sense and made me feel better about what I had done and what I would now do. But everything I looked at had seemed unmoved and unaffected by my arrival, and stay here as it was unmoved at my leaving. I changed nothing. I picked up my 2 small suitcases and the box that contained Carrie's sailboat and started out of the living room down the stairs just as May was rushing back into the house. At first I thought something had happened to Uncle Jacob, but she was waving a big envelope. She said it had a very special delivery. I put my suitcases down, and it was a letter from Alice Morgan. "What is it?" May said. I shook my head and I sat on the top step and I ripped open the envelope. How silly, I thought. She sent me the latest In Vogue catalog, a mail-order fashion company whose clothing was very expensive. I knew her mother subscribed to it and had ordered it, but why would she send it to me? The top right corner of one page was folded in. First I read the letter she sent me with the catalog. "Dear Melanie, I was sitting in the kitchen eating a sandwich for lunch when I decided to thumb through Mom's latest In Vogue. Usually the fashions bore me and nothing ever looks as a good idea as it does in a catalog. At least that's what my mom always says. But when I got to page 42, I noticed something that might interest you too. The model on the top page looks so much like your mother. I couldn't resist mailing this to you as quickly as possible. Her hair is a different color, of course, but, well, look for yourself. Amazing, isn't it? I still want to come visit, and I'm waiting for you to tell me when's a good time. Let's not stop being friends because we live far apart from each other. What's new in your life? Boyfriends, girlfriends? Are you doing anything fun? Please write back as soon as you can or call. Call collect if you want. I miss you. Love, Alice. I folded the letter, then opened the catalog slowly. May watched with interest as I stared at the model on the page. It trickled a chill that started up my spine and circled my body and froze my heart. My breath caught. I didn't realize how long I was holding it, till my chest constricted and May shook my hand, demanding to know what was wrong. This woman, I explained, stuttering through my thoughts, looks so much like my mother, it's scary. May's eyes widened with interest as she peered over my shoulder. I got to show this to Kenneth, I muttered. I stood up and gazed at my suitcases before I go to Grandma Olivia's. I put the suitcases back in my room and hurried downstairs. I went to the kitchen and called the taxi company, asking for the car immediately. Then I went outside, hardly able to take my eyes off the face of the model in the latest In Vogue catalog. She even had that little turn at the upper lip. Uncle Jacob and Aunt Sarah were sitting in the front porch. Both looked with surprise and interest as I burst out of the house with the catalog in my hand. "What did you get, dear?" Aunt Sarah asked. Uncle Jacob didn't want to show any interest, but couldn't help himself. "My friend Alice Morgan, remember, from Sewell?" "Oh, yes. She sent me this catalog because there's a model in it that looks like my mother," I explained. Uncle Jacob's eyes widened with more interest. "Oh, really?" Aunt Sarah said, leaning toward me, and I opened the catalog to the page that Alice had remarked. "Yes, there is some resemblance, isn't there, Jacob?" she asked, showing him the catalog. He stared and then grunted. "Some? What of it?" he muttered. "There's more than some," I said, taking the catalog back. "What about it?" he asked. "I want to know more about her," I said. "What for? When someone dies, we should let her rest in peace," he said, dictating his gaze to Aunt Sarah more than me. The reference to Laura was clear. She pressed her lips together and looked away. I saw my cab coming down the street. "That's for me," I said as it drew closer. "For you? What for? My mother's sending the car." "No need to waste money," Uncle Jacob said, "just because you're going to go live with people that have some." "I'm going to show this to Kenneth," I said. I'm going to come back to this house." "Now?" Uncle Jacob demanded. "No one knows my mother's face better than Kenneth," I explained. "I'll feel better showing it to him." "You're just wasting good time. Your own and everyone else's," he said. "There's enough to do, and I'm packed." There wasn't much to do. "My bags are upstairs ready to be brought down," I added to please him. "Good," he said. The cab pulled away, and I started for it. "Melanie," Aunt Sarah called, and I turned back. She stared like someone who had forgotten why she called me. "Yes? Don't you want any lunch, dear?" "No, but thank you, Aunt Sarah. I'll be back as soon as I can," I said. "Just have Kenneth or the cab take you to Grandma Olivia's," Uncle Jacob said. "I'll call Raymond and he'll come get your bags while you're wasting everyone's time." "Thank you," Uncle Jacob said. "I hope you get better soon and get back to see that you love so much." He looked surprised, and I smiled as his thoughts stumbled over my words of kindness. Then I hurried into the cab, the magazine clutching in my hand.